The notice appeared in the Thursday edition of the London Gazette, buried between a shipping announcement and a notice about a missing hunting dog. Missing. Mrs. Catherine Voss, age 29. Last seen the evening of October 14th at the family residence on Cavendish Square. Brown hair, gray eyes, slight build. Anyone with information is asked to contact Mr. Gerald Voss at the above address. A reward is offered. It was a small notice, 4 lines. Gerald Voss had paid for exactly 4 lines. James Aldridge, Duke of Hartwell, read the notice twice. He was sitting in his library at the time, still in his riding clothes, a cup of tea gone cold beside him, the Thursday paper open across his knee. Outside, the grounds were gray with early morning fog. Inside, the fire was low. He had not slept well. He read the notice a 3rd time. Then he folded the newspaper carefully, set it on the table beside the cold tea, and walked out of the library. Down the east corridor, past the portraits of 3 generations of Aldridges who had all, to varying degrees, made decisions they later regretted. He stopped at the door at the end of the corridor, knocked once. A long pause. Then, yes, he opened the door. She was sitting in the chair by the window, exactly where he had left her 2 days ago. She had not touched the breakfast tray. She was watching the fog on the grounds with the expression of someone who had learned, over a long period of time, to make her face say nothing. She turned when he entered. He held up the folded newspaper. Her eyes went to it. Something moved across her face, fast, controlled, gone. "He's looking for you," the Duke said. "I know," she said. A silence. "The notice is small," he said. 4 lines. She turned back to the window. "That sounds right," she said quietly. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the newspaper in his hand, the fog on the grounds, the untouched breakfast tray. Then he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Because the notice was 4 lines, and Gerald Voss had offered a reward, and James Aldridge, Duke of Hartwell, had not yet decided what he was going to do about any of it, but he had closed the door. Catherine Voss, née Hartley, had been 26 when she married Gerald. She had not wanted to. This is important to say plainly, because the rest of the story makes more sense when you understand that she had known, standing at that altar, that she was making a mistake. She had known it the way you know a storm is coming, not from evidence, not from reason, but from something older than both. Her mother had said, "He is a good match." Her father had said, "He is a wealthy man." Her own reflection in the mirror that morning had said nothing. It had simply looked back at her with gray eyes that already knew. Gerald Voss was not a violent man. This is also important to say, because the women in the pews at church, the ones who nodded at Catherine on Sunday mornings and asked after her health, they would have said, "Gerald Voss? No. He is a respectable man, a good husband. Look how well she dresses." And she did dress well. Gerald was particular about that. He was particular about many things: what she said at dinner, who she spoke to at gatherings, whether she laughed too loudly, sat too long with one person, asked too many questions of the wrong kind. He kept a careful account of her mistakes, not in a book, but in his voice, in the way he looked at her across a room, in the silences that followed certain sentences. 3 years of this. 3 years of being managed like a property that needed to maintain its value. She had not planned to run. That is perhaps the most honest thing that can be said about the night of October 14th. There was no grand scheme, no packed bag waiting under the bed, no carriage arranged in secret. There was only Gerald's voice, finally saying the thing he had been building toward for 3 years, and Catherine standing very still in the drawing room, and something inside her going quiet in a way that felt permanent. She had walked out the front door. She had not taken her coat. It was a cold night. She had walked for a long time without knowing where she was going, and then, because the human body eventually makes decisions the mind is too exhausted to make, she had stopped. She had stopped at the edge of the Hartwell grounds. She had looked at the gate. She had not known the Duke of Hartwell, not really. They had met twice, at a dinner, at a funeral. He had said very little both times. He had seemed like a man who kept his own counsel and expected others to do the same. She had pushed open the gate. She still didn't know, 3 days later, exactly why. He came to her room the following morning. Not the Thursday morning, the Friday. He had given her a day. She understood, in retrospect, that this had been deliberate. He was a man who understood the value of letting a situation settle before he applied pressure to it. He knocked. She said yes. He came in. He did not sit. He stood near the door with his hands behind his back and looked at her with an expression she could not read. Not unkind, not warm, simply the face of a man who had thought carefully about something and arrived at a conclusion. "I have a proposition," he said. She waited. "You may stay here," he said, "as long as you need to. You will have this room, meals, privacy. No one on my staff will speak of your presence. As far as the outside world is concerned, you are not here." A pause. "And in return," she said. He looked at her steadily. "My mother," he said, "is dying." She had not expected that. He continued, his voice the same, measured, precise, giving nothing away. "She has been unwell for 2 years. She is not in pain, but she is old, and she knows it, and there is one thing she has asked of me for the past 18 months. He paused. "She wants to see me settled," he said, "married, or at the very least, not alone. She worries." Something moved briefly across his face, too fast to name. She has always worried. Catherine said nothing. She was beginning to understand the shape of what he was about to say, and she found that she needed a moment with it. "I am not asking you to marry me," he said, immediately, reading her face with an accuracy she found unsettling. "I am asking you to have dinner with her, twice a week, perhaps 3 times, to speak with her, to be present in the house in a way that she can see." "You want me to perform," Catherine said. "I want you to have dinner," he said. "What she concludes from that is her own business." She looked at him for a long time. He was, she thought, a strange man. Not in the way Gerald was strange. Gerald's strangeness had been the strangeness of a locked room, something hidden and airless behind a respectable door. This man's strangeness was different. It was the strangeness of someone who had decided at some point to be entirely honest about his own calculations. He was not pretending this was charity. He was not pretending it was anything other than what it was, an arrangement, offered plainly, with terms stated clearly on both sides. She found, to her surprise, that she respected it. "Your mother," she said, "does she know about me? About Gerald, the notice?" "No," he said. "What does she think I am?" A brief pause. "A guest," he said. "A friend of a friend, visiting from the country, resting. She did not ask many questions." He paused again. "She does not ask many questions. It is one of her better qualities." Catherine stood up. She walked to the window, not to look at anything in particular, but because she needed to move. Outside, the fog had cleared. The Hartwell grounds were wide and gray-green, a long lawn running toward a tree line, a path disappearing into the distance. It was, she thought, a very large estate for one man. "And when she dies," Catherine said. Silence. "Then our arrangement ends," he said. "You will have time, whatever time she has left, to determine what comes next for you. I have a solicitor who handles certain matters discreetly. He can assist with options. There are places, for women in particular situations, arrangements that can be made." She turned from the window. "You've done this before," she said. "No," he said, "but you knew what to say." He looked at her. "I have a sister," he said, and then said nothing more. She thought about Gerald, about the 4-line notice in the Thursday Gazette, about the reward he had offered. She found she could not stop thinking about the reward, about the fact that he had reduced her to a number, a sum, a transaction, and then published it in a newspaper between a shipping announcement and a missing hunting dog. She thought about the front door she had walked out of, the cold night, the gate. She had not taken her coat. "If I say yes, and Gerald finds me anyway—" "He won't," the Duke said. "You can't know that." "No," he said, "but I can make it considerably more difficult for him." A pause. "Gerald Voss is a man of moderate means and considerable pride. I am a duke. These two facts in combination tend to produce a particular outcome." It was not a boast. It was, again, simply a calculation stated plainly. Catherine looked at him. "Dinner," she said. "Twice a week." "Perhaps 3 times," he said. "She likes company." "And you will tell no one?" "I will tell no one." She looked out the window once more. The long lawn, the path into the trees, the wide gray-green of a life that was not hers and might, for a time, be the only thing standing between her and the one she had left. "All right," she said. He nodded once, turned toward the door. "Dinner is at 7, he said. "She dresses. She appreciates it when guests do the same." He left. Catherine stood at the window for a long time after he was gone, looking at the grounds, thinking about a woman she had never met who was dying upstairs and did not ask many questions. Then she turned to the wardrobe. She had left home without her coat, but she had, by some instinct she still didn't fully understand, taken her best dress. The first dinner was a performance. Catherine understood this going in, and she performed accordingly. Sat straight, spoke when spoken to, smiled at the right moments, asked questions she already knew the shape of the answers to. She had spent 3 years perfecting exactly this skill in Gerald's drawing room. It transferred. The Duchess of Hartwell, "Eleanor," she said, "please call me Eleanor, I am too old for formality," was small and white-haired and sharper than Catherine had anticipated. She sat at the head of the table wrapped in a burgundy shawl, a barely touched plate in front of her, and watched Catherine with eyes that had, clearly at some point in their long life, seen a great deal. The Duke sat at the other end of the table and said almost nothing. "You're from the country," Eleanor said. "Yes," Catherine said. "Which part?" Catherine named a village. Eleanor nodded as though she knew it, which she possibly did. She seemed like a woman who had made it her business to know things. "And you're resting," Eleanor said. "Yes." "From what?" A brief pause. Across the table, Catherine felt rather than saw the Duke come still. "From a great many things," Catherine said. Eleanor looked at her for a moment, then smiled, small, private, the smile of a woman who recognized an answer that was also a door being firmly closed. "Yes," she said, "I understand that completely." She did not trust him. This is worth saying clearly, because what came after might suggest otherwise, and the sequence matters. Catherine Voss had spent 3 years learning what happened when you trusted a man who had not yet shown you who he was. She had learned it slowly, the way you learn most important things, gradually, then all at once. She watched him instead. She watched him with his staff, the housekeeper, Mrs. Reed, who had clearly worked for him for a long time and spoke to him with the ease of someone who had survived various versions of him. The groundskeeper who knocked on the library door one morning and reported something about the east fence, and to whom the Duke listened with full attention before asking 2 precise questions and giving 1 clear answer. The young footman who dropped an entire tray of glasses in the entrance hall and stood in the wreckage looking as though he expected to be dismissed on the spot. The Duke had looked at the broken glass, then at the footman. "Are you hurt?" he said. The footman blinked. "No, Your Grace." "Good," the Duke said. "Get someone to help you clear it," and walked on. She had been coming down the stairs when it happened. She stood on the landing for a moment after he had gone, looking at the footman who was still standing in the broken glass with an expression of profound relief. She filed this away. She was filing a great many things away. The days had a shape she had not expected. Breakfast alone, in her room or in the small morning room off the east corridor. Mrs. Reed had made this available to her without being asked, which Catherine suspected was not an accident. The mornings were her own. She read. There were books, a great many books, and no one suggested she read particular ones or avoid particular ones. She walked in the grounds when the weather allowed. She thought. She had not, she realized, been allowed to simply think for 3 years. In the afternoons, she sometimes heard the Duke in the library. Not words, just the occasional movement, the sound of a chair, once the distant sound of something being set down harder than intended, followed by a long silence. She did not knock. He did not knock on her door. They moved through the same house like 2 people who had agreed, without discussing it, to give each other a wide berth. Dinner, twice, sometimes 3 times a week, with Eleanor. The rest of the time, nothing. An absence of demand that felt, at first, deeply suspicious, and then, slowly, like something else entirely. The conversation that changed things was not a dramatic one. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, the light going gold across the library floor. She had come to return a book, knocked, heard yes, entered. He was at his desk. Papers, ledgers, the business of being a duke, which seemed to involve a considerable amount of correspondence. She set the book on the shelf. "Did you finish it?" he said. He was still looking at his papers. "Yes." "And?" She considered. "The ending is wrong," she said. He looked up. "Wrong how?" "She goes back to him," Catherine said. "After everything, she goes back, and the author treats it as a resolution, as though return is the same thing as repair." He held her gaze for a moment, not intrusively, not warmly, simply with the same directness he applied to everything, as though he was hearing what she had actually said, not the polite version of it. "No, I don't suppose they had." She nodded, moved toward the door. "There are others, on the 3rd shelf, if you want something with a better ending." She stopped, turned. "Do they exist, books with better endings?" He thought about this with apparent seriousness. "Some of them," he said. "You have to look." She began to eat breakfast downstairs. Not a decision exactly. One morning she simply came down and sat at the table in the morning room, and Mrs. Reed brought tea and did not remark upon it. The following morning the Duke was already there. Papers, as always, spread across one end of the table, coffee going cold, the expression of a man in the middle of a thought. He looked up. She sat down. Mrs. Reed brought more tea. They did not speak for some time. This, Catherine found, was perfectly comfortable. She could not remember the last time silence with another person had been comfortable. Gerald's silences had always had a temperature to them, cold in a way that meant something, that required management, interpretation, careful navigation. This silence was simply silence. "The east fence," the Duke said, eventually, without looking up from his papers. "I'm sorry?" "The groundskeeper, last week. The east fence needs replacing. It's a significant expense, and Hargreaves has 3 different opinions about the best approach, all of them contradictory." He paused. "I mention it only because you were on the landing when he came to report it." She stared at him. "You knew I was there," she said. "Yes. And you're telling me this because—" "Because," he said, finally looking up, "you clearly noticed, and you have been trying to work out what kind of man I am for 3 weeks now. I thought it might be useful information." She looked at him across the breakfast table. The papers, the cold coffee, the morning light coming through the tall windows. "That is," she said slowly, "a very unusual thing to say." "Yes," he said. "I've been told that before." He looked back at his papers. The third shelf, second row, blue cover, better ending. She found the book that afternoon. She did not go back to her room to read it. She sat in the library, in the chair by the window, and read it there. He worked at his desk, she read. The fire went low, and neither of them moved to fix it until Mrs. Reed came in at 4 o'clock, looked at them both, said nothing, and put another log on. It was Mrs. Reed who came to her first. A Thursday morning, earlier than Catherine usually came down. The knock on her door was different from the usual knock, the one that meant breakfast was ready or Eleanor was asking for her. This knock was quieter, more deliberate. She opened the door. Mrs. Reed stood in the corridor with her hands folded in front of her and an expression that Catherine had not seen on her face before. Not alarm, exactly. Something more controlled than alarm. The face of a woman who had decided before knocking exactly what she was going to say and how she was going to say it. "There is a man," Mrs. Reed said, "at the gate."
Catherine went very still. "He has not come to the door," Mrs. Reed continued. "He is simply at the gate. He has been there for approximately 20 minutes. Thomas noticed him on his morning rounds." "What does he look like?" Catherine said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by this. Mrs. Reed described him in 4 sentences. She did not need 4 sentences. She needed 2 words. Catherine knew after the first. She found the Duke in the library. He was already standing when she entered, which meant, she understood immediately, that Mrs. Reed had gone to him first, or simultaneously. She filed this away with everything else she had filed away about this house and the people in it, and then she set it aside because there were more pressing things. "You know," she said. "Yes." "How long has he been there?" 20 minutes at the gate. Before that," he paused. "Thomas recognized him from a description given at the village inn. He has been in the area for 3 days." 3 days. She absorbed this. "He's been looking," she said. "Yes. And he found the general area," the Duke said. "Not this house specifically, not yet. Men like Gerald Voss ask questions in inns and post offices, and they tip generously, and they smile, and they say the right things, and eventually someone tells them something." He paused. "Someone told him something." She walked to the window, not the window that faced the gate, a different one, looking out over the south lawn. Her hands, she noticed, were completely steady. This seemed wrong. 3 weeks ago she had walked out of a house in the cold without her coat because she could not spend one more moment inside it. And now Gerald was at the gate, and her hands were steady. Perhaps she had used up her panic. Perhaps there was a finite amount, and she had spent it all on the night of October 14th. "The arrangement," she said. "You said it would end when your mother—" "My mother," he said, "is not the subject of this conversation." She turned from the window. He was looking at her with that same direct, unreadable expression, the one she had spent 3 weeks learning to read and had only partially succeeded. But there was something different in it now, something that had not been there on the morning he had come to her room with his proposition and his carefully stated terms. "What is the subject," she said, "of this conversation?" "What you want," he said. "Not what is practical, not what is possible, not what the law says or what society says or what Gerald Voss says by standing at my gate for 20 minutes.
A pause. What you want. She stared at him. I want, she said carefully, to not be at the end of whatever Gerald intends to do when he finds me. That is what you don't want, he said. It is not the same thing. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the ones they had built over 3 weeks of breakfasts and library afternoons. Those silences had been comfortable, easy. The silence of two people who had, without agreeing to it, stopped performing for each other. This silence had weight. If I send him away, the Duke said, he will come back. You understand this? Yes. If I tell him you are not here, he will not believe it. Men like Gerald Voss do not accept the word of another man when pride is involved. And his pride, he said, is very much involved. I know, she said. There are 2 options that actually resolve this, he said. The first is legal. My solicitor, the matter of grounds, the question of what can be proven and what can be argued. It is slow, it is not certain, and in the meantime you would need to remain somewhere. And the second, she said. He looked at her. The second, he said, is that Gerald Voss comes to this door, and what he finds here is not a missing wife, but a woman who is demonstrably, publicly, and inconveniently connected to a duke, in a way that makes pursuing her more trouble than it is worth. A pause. Gerald Voss is a man of moderate means and considerable pride. I said this to you once before. You did, she said. Pride can be used, he said, if you know where to apply pressure. She looked at him for a long moment. You would do this, she said. Go to the door, speak to him. Yes. And say what exactly? He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, with the same plainness he applied to everything, whatever is necessary. Gerald came to the door at 11 o'clock. The Catherine was not in the entrance hall. The Duke had not asked her to leave. She had decided it herself. She stood at the top of the stairs, out of sight, and listened to the sound of the front door opening, and Mrs. Reed's voice, and then Gerald's voice, and then the Duke's. Gerald's voice was exactly as she remembered it, moderate, controlled. The voice of a man who had learned, early, that volume was less effective than precision. She could not hear the words clearly. She heard the shape of them, Gerald's measured sentences, the Duke's shorter responses. A pause. Gerald again, longer this time. The Duke, quiet, 2 sentences at most. Then silence. Then the door. Then nothing. He came upstairs 10 minutes later. She was in the corridor by then. She had not been able to stay at the top of the stairs. She had moved to the window at the end of the hall, the one that looked out over the front drive, and she had watched Gerald walk back down the path to the gate. His back was very straight. His pace was exactly the same as it always was. She had watched him go through the gate, watched the gate close. She was still at the window when the Duke found her. What did you say to him? She said. Several things. He's gone. Yes. She kept looking at the drive, the empty path, the gate closed now, Gerald nowhere in sight. He'll come back, she said. You said so yourself. He may, the Duke said, but not soon, and not in the same manner. A pause. I suggested to him, with some specificity, that the manner in which he has handled this situation, the notice, the reward, the inquiry at the village inn, reflects poorly on him. That a man of his standing, publicly searching for a wife who has clearly chosen to leave, is not a sympathetic figure. Another pause. Gerald Voss cares a great deal about how he appears. I gave him something to think about in that regard. She turned from the window. That's all, she said. He looked at her. No, he said, that is not all. I told him, the Duke said, that you were under my protection. I used that phrase specifically. He understood what it meant. And what does it mean? She said. Specifically. He held her gaze. It means, he said, that the arrangement has changed. If you wanted to. She stood in the corridor with the window light behind her and looked at him. This strange, precise, honest man who had taken her in without flourish and kept her without drama, and gone to the door this morning and said whatever was necessary. The arrangement, she said slowly. Yes. I'm saying, he said, that I would like you to stay. Not as a guest, not under terms. Simply stay. He paused. If you want to. Outside, the drive was empty. The gate was closed, the long path leading away from a house that had, over the course of 3 weeks, stopped feeling like someone else's. She thought about it. She thought about it for 3 days. Not because she was uncertain. She understood, somewhere around the end of the first day, that she had already decided. But she had spent 3 years in a house where her decisions were not really her decisions, where what she wanted had been managed and shaped and redirected until she could barely locate it anymore. And so she gave herself 3 days. Not because she needed them, because she could. Because no one in this house was going to knock on her door and ask what was taking so long. This, she had come to understand, was what it felt like to be treated as a person who was capable of deciding things. She found she needed to sit with that for a while. On the first day, she walked the grounds. All of them. The south lawn, the path into the trees she had seen from her window on the very first morning and never taken. The kitchen garden where something was still growing despite the November cold. The east fence that Hargreaves had 3 contradictory opinions about. She walked until the light went, and then she came inside and had dinner with Eleanor, who talked about a trip she had taken to the Italian coast in 1847 and the particular quality of the light there, and did not ask Catherine a single question. On the way upstairs afterward, Eleanor took her hand briefly at the landing. She didn't say anything, just held it for a moment, then let go and went to her room. Catherine stood on the landing for a while after she had gone. On the second day, she wrote a letter. Not to Gerald. She was done writing things to Gerald. She had, she realized, been writing things to Gerald in one form or another for 3 years. Carefully composed communications designed to manage his mood, his perception, his temperature. She was finished with that. She wrote to her sister, Margaret, 5 years younger, married and in Edinburgh, who had written to Catherine twice during the marriage, with letters that said the careful things and the right things and never quite said the thing underneath, which Catherine had always suspected was, I see what is happening and I don't know what to do. She wrote to Margaret now. Not a careful letter, not a managed one, a plain one, the way the Duke spoke, she thought, plain and precise and without decoration. She said what had happened. She said where she was. She said she was well. She said she was, for the first time in a long time, deciding things for herself. She sealed it, gave it to Mrs. Reed, who took it without comment and had it sent within the hour. On the third day, she went to the library. He was there, as he usually was in the afternoons, at his desk, papers, correspondence, the ongoing business of the estate. He looked up when she came in. She sat down in the chair by the window, the one that had, over the past weeks, become her chair in the way that things become yours without any formal agreement. She did not speak immediately, neither did he. Outside, the grounds were pale with the first suggestion of frost. I've been thinking, she said finally. Yes, he said. About what you said, the arrangement changing. Yes? She looked at the window, the frost on the grass, the long lawn running toward the tree line. I need to tell you something first, she said, before I give you an answer. All right? She turned to look at him. I am not the same person I was before I married Gerald, she said. I don't mean this as a warning exactly, I mean it as information. 3 years of of what that was. It changes the shape of a person. I don't entirely know yet what shape I am now. I'm still finding out." He was listening. He always listened in this way, fully, without preparing his response while she was still speaking. She had noticed this early and filed it away and taken it out to look at many times since. "I may be difficult," she said. "I don't trust easily. I watch everything. I notice when something doesn't add up and I don't let it go. I ask questions that may feel like accusations. I won't apologize for any of it. It's what kept me intact." "I know," he said. "You don't know yet," she said. "Not really." "No," he said. "Not really. But I know enough to know that these are not the things you apologize for." He paused. "I have a sister, as I told you. She also does not let things go. I have found, over time, that people who notice everything and ask questions that feel like accusations are considerably more useful than people who don't." Catherine looked at him. "Useful," she said. "Present," he said. "I meant present. My vocabulary is sometimes imprecise." She almost smiled again. This time, she let it happen. "Yes," she said. "I've noticed." She told him her answer then. Not with a speech. She had no interest in speeches, had heard enough of them in drawing rooms and at dinner tables and at an altar 3 years ago. She told him plainly, in 2 sentences, what she had decided. He received it the way he received most things, without excessive reaction, with a single nod, with the look of a man who had hoped for a particular outcome and was now, quietly, making room for it. Then he said, with complete seriousness, "My mother will be insufferable about this." And Catherine laughed, a real one, not the managed, calibrated laugh she had deployed for 3 years at Gerald's dinner table, but a genuine one, unexpected, rising up before she could shape it into something appropriate. He looked at her when she laughed, just for a moment, and something in his face, usually so careful, so controlled, shifted into something she did not have a word for yet. She thought she might, eventually, find one. That evening, Eleanor looked between them twice, said nothing, ate approximately 4 more bites than usual. When Catherine stood to leave, she took her hand at the table this time, not the landing. "Good," Eleanor said. Simply that. Catherine looked at her, this small, white-haired woman with the sharp eyes, who had never asked many questions, and had, Catherine now understood, never needed to. "You knew," Catherine said, "from the beginning." "I'm dying, not blind," Eleanor said, pleasantly. Gerald Voss did not come back, not to the gate, not in any other form. The Duke's solicitor, a quiet man named Alderton, who handled certain matters discreetly and had clearly done so for a long time, managed the legal dimensions of what followed with the same economy the Duke applied to everything. It was not without difficulty. It took time. But Gerald Voss was, as the Duke had correctly assessed, a man of moderate means and considerable pride, and the calculation he eventually made was the one a man like that always makes when pride and practicality come into direct conflict. He let it be. Catherine received 1 letter from him 8 months later. 2 paragraphs, moderate, controlled, precise. She read it once, recognized it immediately as the letter of a man who needed the last word, and put it in the fire. She did not write back. She did not need to. Eleanor died in the spring. April, a mild day. The grounds just beginning to come back, the first things pushing up in the kitchen garden. She had been comfortable. She had not been in pain. She went the way she'd lived, on her own terms, in her own time, in her own room with the window open, because she had always preferred air to stillness. Catherine sat with her the evening before. They talked about the Italian coast again, the light, the particular quality of it, the way it was different from English light in a way that was hard to explain to someone who hadn't seen both. "You'll go someday," Eleanor said. "Perhaps," Catherine said. "You will," Eleanor said, with the certainty of someone who has run out of time for perhaps. "Take him with you. He has never been. He won't admit this is a problem, but it is." Catherine looked at her. "He'll be all right," Eleanor said. "He was always going to be all right. He just needed—" She paused. "Someone who notices things. He notices everything and has no one to notice things with. It's a lonely way to live." Catherine held her hand. Eleanor closed her eyes. "The light in the mornings here is also very good," Eleanor said after a while. "I should have told him that more often." She was gone by morning. The house was quiet for a while after that. Not unhappily quiet, differently quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after something large has moved through and you are learning the new shape of things. Catherine had learned by now to let quiet be what it was rather than trying to manage it. She and the Duke moved through the house. They had breakfast. He worked. She read and walked, and had taken, over the winter, to spending time in the kitchen garden with the groundskeeper's wife, who knew a great deal about growing things and had opinions about all of it. They talked, in the evenings mostly, in the library, the fire going, papers on his desk and a book in her hands, or sometimes no book, just the fire and the conversation. They talked about the estate and about books, and about his sister Louisa, who lived in Bath and wrote letters that were considerably more entertaining than most published novels. They talked about Eleanor. They talked, carefully at first, and then less carefully, about Gerald, and about the years before Gerald, and about what Catherine wanted, not practically, not in terms of what was possible, but actually wanted, from the days ahead. Nobody had asked her this before. She found she had a great deal to say. They married in September. Small, Catherine's preference, and he had no objection to small. Louisa came from Bath and cried at inappropriate moments and said things that made Catherine laugh and the Duke look pained in a way that was clearly affectionate. Alderton, the solicitor, attended, and looked quietly pleased with himself in the way of a man who had managed the legal dimensions of a complicated situation and was now watching it resolve well. Mrs. Reed wore her best dress and said nothing about it. Margaret came from Edinburgh the following spring. She stayed for 2 weeks. She and Catherine walked the grounds and sat in the morning room and talked for long hours about things that had gone unsaid for years. Carefully composed letters giving way finally to the actual conversation underneath. On the last evening, Margaret said, "I should have said something when you were married. I should have said it plainly." "You didn't know what to say," Catherine said. "I knew something was wrong." "Yes," Catherine said, "but knowing something is wrong and knowing what to say are different things. I know that now." Margaret looked at her, at the kitchen garden visible through the window, at the house around them, at Catherine herself, who was, she had clearly noticed over 2 weeks, a different shape than the sister she had last seen 3 years ago. "You're well," Margaret said. Not a question. "Yes," Catherine said. "He's—" "Yes," Catherine said again. Margaret nodded, looked out the window. "He's very quiet," she said. "He notices everything," Catherine said. "He simply doesn't perform it." Margaret considered this. "Louisa told me he laughed at dinner last night," she said. "She said she hadn't heard that in years." Catherine looked at the kitchen garden. The things growing, the ones she had planted in March, coming up now in the April light. "He's adjusting," she said. They went to Italy the following autumn. 2 weeks, the coast, the light Eleanor had described. It was exactly as she had said. Different from English light. Difficult to explain to someone who hadn't seen both. The Duke stood on a terrace above the water on the third evening and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Catherine stood beside him. Below them, the sea moved, slow and dark blue, and the last of the sun was doing something complicated on the horizon. "She was right," he said finally. "She usually was," Catherine said. He was quiet for a moment. "I should have brought her," he said. "Once, years ago. I said there wasn't time." "There's never time," Catherine said, "until there isn't any." He looked at the water. "Yes," he said. She took his hand. He did not make anything of it. No reaction, no performance. Simply turned his hand to hold hers, the way you hold something you have decided to hold. They stood there until the light was gone. The east fence was eventually replaced. Hargreaves's second opinion turned out to be correct, which he accepted with the graciousness of a man who had always suspected as much. The kitchen garden expanded, Catherine's doing, over 3 seasons of accumulated opinions from the groundskeeper's wife. The library acquired new books, steadily, in the way that libraries do when 2 people who read are living in the same house. Mrs. Reed, asked once by Louisa whether the house felt different now, thought about it for a moment and said, "It feels like someone opened a window." Louisa wrote this down. She wrote a great many things down. Whether any of it was ever published is another story. Catherine kept no diary. She had nothing to record for Gerald's benefit now, no account to manage, no version of events to curate. She had considered keeping one, a real one, honest, for herself, and had decided against it. The life was enough. She did not need to write it down to know it was hers. Some mornings she still woke early, in the old way, alert, already calculating, braced for the temperature of the silence. 3 years leaves marks. She understood this now, and had made her peace with it. On those mornings she came downstairs and made tea, and sat in the morning room in the early light, and eventually she heard him. The library door, his footsteps, the particular sound of a man who had also, for his own reasons, never quite learned to sleep past 5. He would appear in the doorway, see her, say nothing. Sit down. Mrs. Reed would bring more tea without being asked. Outside, whatever the season was doing, it did. Inside, the house went about its morning unhurried, unmanaged, making none of the demands that houses sometimes make on the people living in them. They sat. It was enough. It was, Catherine thought, on one of those mornings, frost on the glass, tea going warm in her hands, the day not yet begun, considerably more than enough. It was, in fact, exactly what she had wanted. She just hadn't known, until recently, that she was allowed to say so. Dear viewers, it has been a true pleasure sharing this story with you all the way to the end. Your time, attention, and presence mean more than words can fully express. I sincerely wish you all the very best wherever you are in the world. Please take a moment to tell us which city you're watching from and what you felt about this story. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story waiting for you here.